Hello, this is Paul Milligan for ISE Show TV at ISE 2017. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. This one is entitled, How do you ensure a consistent user experience across a global enterprise? I'm joined today by Byron Towery from the GPA, Julian Phillips from the GPA, and Johannes from avi-spl. So gentlemen, your work kind of globally, what are the pitfalls and what are the tips maybe you could give? Byron, maybe start with you, you're nearest.
Well, I think we spent many years trying to look at user experience and so on from a technology standpoint, but I think actually the maturity that's occurring now is starting to look at it from a much broader standpoint, from a globalization standpoint in larger organizations in particular, and leveraging both the opportunities that AV and IT convergence has given us, but also the specialization that the AV industry has always brought to that localized room environment, that space environment, so that merge of space technology and the people that use. And when you can bring that level of maturity and start to think of it in those terms, then it really changes the whole approach to how you deliver that user experience.
Julian, this is something you've done for many moons. I mean, how do you use those years of experience to sort of make sure it is consistent from Tokyo to London to Sydney?
I think what we have to recognize is that in the same way that Byron was talking about, is that end user customers have looked at space and environment in a silo, they've looked at people and content in a silo, and they've looked at technology in a silo. And often when you try to execute technology and the user experience, when everything is in a silo, then you're dysfunctional and you don't actually achieve the output that you would hope that you would. I think one of the big changes that has actually happened in our industry is the fact that when things didn't live on the network, there was almost no real essential driver or motivation to want to actually control everything. Now that we have to deploy technology on the network, we have to be able to effectively fuse all these things together. And so while we're trying to figure out how we merge technology, space, and people together, we now have to create an organization structure that actually tears down those silos and actually enables the processes and the delivery of that experience. And so the game is very much changed now. You can't just pick away at little different parts of the puzzle. You have to figure out how you put all the puzzle together and effectively support the customer in what he's trying to do, which is anyone can walk into any space, any conference room, anywhere in the world and experience exactly the same thing they would do in London, as it would be in New York, as it would be in Brisbane, Australia. And so that's ultimately what they're trying to achieve. And we talk to our customers all around the world, and we actually say, well, what are the most important things that you're trying to do? And they basically said there's three things. We call it the triple S. Is we need simplicity, because the way we've done it in the past is just overly complex. We need standardization to create that common user experience, and we need scale. In other words, whatever we do anywhere in the world, we have to be able to replicate it and support it on that basis. So it's a different game from the one that we used to play, and not all integrators are actually capable of managing that opportunity and that expectation on a global basis.
Johannes, avi-spl is growing rapidly across the world. How do you ensure that all of your offices provide all of those different clients in those different regions with the same user experience, which is obviously key to kind of driving adoption of technology?
So at first we work, of course, closely together within our offices. The second thing is, as you already mentioned, it's a trend of standardization in the world. So global enterprises want to have standardized conference rooms, for example. It's more about video conferencing and collaboration spaces, so people work together more and more globally. If you come to the standardization point, the target for the customer is, if somebody travels from Frankfurt to Shanghai, he needs to go into a conference room in his enterprise and hit the same user experience by going to the touch panel, seeing the same graphic user interface, easily switching the language to German or English, French, whatever language. So it's also about localization of the user experience and make it available for the people in their own language in other countries to have the same experience as in their own rooms.
Sure. I mean, if we were having this discussion maybe 10 years ago, I'm guessing it would primarily be based around video conferencing, but now it's probably 100 different technologies. Does that make it easier or more difficult to try and pull all that together?
Well, I think there's complexity to both fronts, and frankly there's different strategies from customers and indeed different strategies from some of the manufacturers. We were having this discussion yesterday of some that believe that the answer is a single platform, Skype for Business or Cisco Spark, and others that are saying when you walk in the room you're already walking in with a half a dozen different codecs, soft codecs on your phone, on your laptop and so on, and in fact what I need to do is create that ubiquity. I think as long as those strategies are all thoughtful and considered, then there's no right or wrong way, but it has to be a considered strategy, something that is then supportable across the enterprise, that is consistent across the enterprise. But I think to go on to that concept of across the globe, there is a caution around standardization, and that is standardization from a central standpoint where there's no consideration of what the cultural considerations are around the globe. So there is a balance to be thought of understanding the core principles of platforms and so on, but also understanding local contexts of the way an individual in China might collaborate as opposed to an individual in North America or Europe, where there are significant differences in cultural hierarchies and so on. So it's not just about simply scaling a technology solution. That principle of the people space and technology element becomes critical as well. So there has to be that give and take and that balance around achieving a core principle of standardization, but also not ending up with a lack of adoption because that standardization strategy didn't deliver the user experience that they were seeking.
It's interesting that you both mentioned standards, because it's obviously very key to this, but there's obviously only so much you can do as an integrator or consultant to make sure there is one standard or as few standards as possible, I suppose. Is there a frustration sometimes because there are so many different ones?
Well, I think we also need to recognize that customers are struggling with this whole idea as well. And if all this was an exercise to try and actually say, and I can say this because I live in the United States, if it was all just an America first policy, and it was a case of just exporting what we do in the US and make it exactly the same as we had it in the US everywhere, it would actually be a lot easier. It wouldn't work, and it wouldn't actually deliver the experience that the end user actually wants. But what we have to recognize is that there are certain things that need to be standardized, and there are certain things that need to be flexible and adaptable to create and enhance that user experience on a global basis. So as technology advisors to our customers, we need to help them to formulate what needs to be standardized and what needs to be localized, and that actually enhances that experience. And in some cases, that might mean that there may have to be differences. And so there are certain things that are just not negotiable now. We talked about video conferencing. The only reason video conferencing could be standardized because it sat on the network, and it had certain protocols and certain security features that meant that you had to manage it that way. Guess what? Every single conference room and every single device in the enterprise to do with meetings now needs to be on the network. So there are certain things that we have to do around standards that just have to be the way it is. But that doesn't mean that user experience has to be exactly the same. So we believe that the mixture of core standards that are fundamental to the operational management of the infrastructure and the service delivery and security do need to be standardized, but other aspects of the user interface and experience need to reflect both the culture and the identity of the organization. And many organizations have failed with their aspiration to want to drive global standards because they didn't take that into consideration.
I mean, how do you find out about those regional differences, and how much does it actually differ? And is that through meetings or just experience of working in different regions? Byron, how do you?
Well, I think it really comes down to what many of the organizations that are promoting an ability to offer these services out to these global customers look at that deployment strategy. So certainly within the GPA and our focus is on ensuring the local engagement of those deployment members, of our members across the globe. This is not about a centralized strategy to push down and then just tactically use a resource locally. With 26 members around the globe in 50 to 60 countries at this point, we can get that local communication and collaboration from that local team as much as we can look at the core principles and objectives of that organization and make sure that we can balance the two. If it's all a push strategy out, then it tends to collapse without some of that local communication and engagement.
So it's a large part of the creation and existence of the GPA, that you have this kind of shared philosophy and theories and way to do things?
Very much so. I mean, one of the core principles, aside from the business opportunities that are there, is the knowledge share that goes on. So even proactively, before we get to a specific opportunity, that cultural awareness and understanding is critical. And then the knowledge share that occurs both in the preparation and planning of a global strategy, and then the execution and indeed the ongoing support are all critical to the success of that strategy.
Johannes, so, I mean, are we only having this discussion really because Julia mentioned just the explosion of AV over IP? Are this the main reason why we're having this discussion today, do you think, because everything now is networkable?
Yeah, an important aspect of all this, and of course there has to be local amendments to the technology, because of several reasons. Is it the architecture of a room? Is it the architecture of a building? Is it the usage of the rooms because of cultural differences? This is clear. But what we experience is that customers pretty much like one-stop shopping. They want to talk to one or less persons to get their solution. And the most important point from a technical view is that you can manage all your devices. And so you can manage all your sites, you can manage all your devices all over the globe. So you have the maximum output of your investment. So everything is there when you need it. So every technology is up and running. Every room has a high level of availability. So that is an advantage we can take out of this. Everything is on the network piece, that we can manage all the rooms all over the globe for the customer to increase the value of his investment.
I mean, when we talk about global projects of this scale and, you know, a consistent user experience, is that done through people on the ground, or can that be done remotely now? Byron, what do you...
Well, I think there's an element to people on the ground, but the reality is when you scale from 1,000 rooms to 10,000 or 100,000 users, and you're actually supporting a user experience, the economies of scale just don't work to have bespoke individuals running around hand-holding people in rooms and solving those problems. So while there's still definitely an element of customer service that the AV industry is actually very good at, and perhaps better than the IT industry in many instances in the way we respond to that localized, personalized need, the reality is you need to leverage what the AV-IT convergence has given in management to be proactive, to be monitoring things. Those are the key strategies to actually having an efficient, cost-effective model to deliver globally.
Julian, is that on a project basis, whether you decide to have people on the ground or remotely, or do you have a sort of preferred method?
Well, I think this is where we're moving, and this is really the learning that I think a lot of integrators now have, is that whereas we have a lot of specialist knowledge in AV, which is vitally important in this whole pursuit of the customer experience, we also have to learn about some of the methods and methodologies and processes that the IT community have. And so ITIL is a good example. You speak to any global enterprise now about the core principles under how they design an IT service, and they'll talk to you about the base principles of ITIL. So one of the core principles of ITIL is service design. We're not very good at service design in AV. We basically say, look, traditionally, but we have to do it now, is that we'll install these rooms for you and then let's have a conversation about a maintenance contract. That's not service design. Service design is actually thinking about what the end user experience needs to be, and then actually designing the processes and the resources that you actually need to ensure that particular experience, and you need to plan ahead before you've even thought about deploying the technology. And so we're now, when we talk about standards, it's not necessarily the standard of, is it conference room A, B, C with whatever product configuration, it's the standardization of the service experience that leads to the customer experience, the user experience. And so we're now having to learn from the IT industry about stuff that, quite frankly, we shouldn't try to compete with what has already been there, that's already working, that our customers already are aware about. So I think in many ways, what we're really doing now is we're actually bringing the very best of AV, we're bringing the very best of IT, and we're bringing it together to serve what is this massive opportunity for collaboration globally. And it's not IT on its own, and it's not AV on its own, it's really almost like creating a new category.
Sure. Johannes, 5 to 10 years ago, meeting rooms were relatively standard form and certain sizes, you had boardrooms, certain sizes. Now with the rise of the huddle rooms, is that proving difficult to kind of cope with in your business? Or is it just something else that you need to learn and need to know how to provide?
It's a trend, and it's a logical trend, because people are getting more and more to working in smaller units together and getting more efficiency out of this. So the time of having big meetings with a lot of people around a table discussing topics is nowadays seen as less efficient. So companies, from my experience, are coming back to the point that small units are more efficient. The huddle room itself, it's just a different it's just another technology, another form of or another style of a room, which is brought to the table, and it's another room that has to be included in all the things. It has to be managed, it has to be included from the technology perspective, it has to be designed, and especially a huddle room is easy to scale and to standardize.
Are you seeing a lot of technology go into huddle rooms, or does it tend to be relatively basic, a white clean board, or maybe just a flat panel or something?
You mean from a consulting perspective, from the company?
Yeah.
It depends on what the customer wants to achieve with his room. So you have to talk to the customer and discuss with him what you want to do in these rooms. It's not about do you want to have a projector or a screen. It's about what is the goal you have by building your rooms. What is the goal you have with your team, with your employees? What do they need to achieve in their everyday meeting business? So and then you can consult the customer to the point if he needs huddle rooms or bigger conference rooms, if he has more video conferencing rooms. So it differs from customer to customer.
Sure. Byron, are you finding them quite disruptive, huddle rooms, in terms of
No, in fact, I think it's helping these core principles of the need to standardize and so on. But I think when it comes to the complexity, I mean, this is a general shift, but the complexity is coming out of the physical space and moving into the virtual space, into the cloud, into the server and so on. So in many instances, the practicalities of what you can do in some of those huddle spaces are equally complex and significant as what you can do in some of those larger rooms. You don't have the complexity of perhaps the multiple inputs addressing 20 or 30 users in a room, but the practicalities of sharing content, sharing ideas, of collaborating and so on are still being achieved, but much of that's shifting into that virtual core, and as a result that's addressing some of the scalability, because I can upgrade 1,000 rooms overnight by an upgrade on a server core rather than an upgrade on 1,000 bits, 1,000 pieces of tin in a room.
Julian, I mean, huddle rooms is a very hot topic. I mean, do you think it's got legs, or do you think this is just a kind of fad that we're seeing?
Apparently, according to Gartner and everyone else, it's got 100 million legs, 2 per huddle room. But that's going to grow. But I think one of the biggest fails in the huddle room conversation is that, considering that it is a small space that people just need to gather around, have a huddle, plug in a laptop and just show what the content I've got on my laptop. We don't see it that way. And in fact, we have to often re-educate a customer about the huddle space and the utilization of that huddle space and the productivity that happens there, as Byron was saying, is just as important in that small intimate space as it is in the 12-person conference room or even the boardroom, because that's the vast majority of collaborations that take place across the enterprise. So at the very least, even though we might configure the technology to be fairly simple, which it needs to be, I still need to have it connected to the network. I still need to understand what's actually going on in that room. I need to capture data, and I need to be able to actually understand the utilization profile, because it may well be that if I really understand that in the huddle space, I could save a huge amount of investment that I have in more formal meeting spaces and actually have more huddle spaces that actually lead to better productivity. I also need to know if something fails. You know, a collaboration experience between 2 people, if that fails, could be as critical as a collaboration experience for 12. So I have to have a support mechanism to be able to touch and fix and repair that room in the same way that I would a larger space. So I think really the best advice we can give to any customer is let's envision what we want the experience to be. Let's design a service that delivers that experience, and now let's build the infrastructure and the ecosystem that enables that to happen. You can't take whole great big segments of usage out of that model and hope to achieve that particular experience. It has to be part of that same delivery mechanism.
I think that's all we've got time for today, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking part. Thank you.
Thank you.